Welcome to the podcast where we take a deep dive into the stories behind construction business leaders. We will share how they got started, how they found success, and the lessons learned along the way. I'm your host, Eric Fortenberry. Welcome to Builder Stories. Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm extremely excited. We have a very special guest. Dzielski is a measurement specialist at Google. She is going to share her insights and what she has seen going on in the home services industry. Jane has over a decade of experience helping businesses solve complex problems with data. In her current role, she focuses on how companies can leverage Google tools to drive success. She's a popular speaker through her company DataFizz and discusses how consumer behavior is changing in response to economic, social, and cultural trends, and how businesses can leverage technology, including AI, to respond to these shifts. We're so excited to have you joining us today, Jane. Welcome to Builder Stories.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. This is not something I get to do very often, so always a thrill.
Awesome. Well, look, I read a little bio about you, but why don't you kind of tell us, how did you get into this role at Google, and sort of maybe even before that, like what led you to the real estate and home services industries?
Yeah, so really good question. I think I have a bit of an unconventional path. So I studied economics and statistics in school, so that's my background. I use that kind of knowledge to look at really big sets of data and try to make sense of them and understand if I can spot patterns or relationships that we can leverage to make businesses perform better. From that kind of background, that's how I got started in my first role at Google, where I was helping companies primarily in what we called the home services sector. So that would be like national businesses that offer things related to real estate, so like real estate aggregators, home maintenance platforms, so something like a Thumbtack, just also home security, things related to car maintenance. Lots of a very, very broad topic, but generally like things that you kind of need to do as a homeowner, as an adult in the United States. So what I would do is I'd really get to be embedded with a lot of different companies and understand how they run, how they operate, what their customers are looking for, and often kind of what challenges they have. And my role would be to understand the business, to look at their business data, and to look at what we know from our Google data. So Google's a really valuable platform for understanding what people are thinking about, the kind of stuff they want to buy, the things that they're worried about. Between Google search, obviously, and YouTube, we have a lot of insight into what's on the mind of an average American consumer. I've been at Google since 2017, so I've taken on some different positions within that time, worked with a lot of different companies, a lot of different industries. So right now I'm more focused on retail, but I have found in general that when we're thinking about what's going on with the consumer, that affects all of our decisions, from the really, really big ones, like whether I'm going to remodel my home or sell my home, right down to the type of paper towels that I'm going to buy, and whether I'm going to buy them by going to a Walmart or if I'm going to get a subscription so that they automatically get delivered to my door. So the kind of same patterns that are operating around us at all times affect that broad range of decisions. Since starting at Google, I also have my own separate company now called DataFizz, and that's really where I'm speaking at conferences, meeting a lot of people who are actually practitioners. So I don't engage with those people that much in my day job at Google. It really is often just large data sets. So those opportunities are really, really interesting because I can understand how these things are affecting people in those very granular levels on very local businesses. So that's a little bit how I got to be here. Unlike a lot of your guests, I actually don't know that much about building physical spaces, but I have found that a lot of people in this field find my perspective useful.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I can only imagine the amount of data that Google has that there's probably a lot of opportunity to go study it and try to better understand it, and then figure out how can you turn that, that data into information that can be actionable, insightful for businesses.
Yeah, so that's exactly kind of what we're trying to do. So it often manifests in kind of unexpected ways. So when people are coming to Google, they might be looking for a toothbrush, or they might be looking for someone to help them sell their home. But ultimately, we're able to triangulate, between where they are, the types of questions they're asking, questions that more broadly, when we see these trends, these patterns change over time, it kind of helps us get a pulse that we can understand when we look at other third-party research sources or other patterns that we just know are going on, things like the Federal Reserve of Economic Data, like how does that change the way people are looking to buy things? So some examples recently as far as kind of changing consumer behavior is that obviously a big factor is the use of AI as people are doing their research for products. So I'd say more and more I've kind of watched an evolution happening where the research before you make a big decision is very much kind of part of that process of like getting to the goal of having accomplished something or buying something, like making sure that you feel really good about that decision is so important, and be able to have that sense of being a really like savvy person who understands the inputs into price, whether or not this is a good value. So even if it's more expensive, people are often willing to pay that premium if they can feel really confident that they understand what they're buying and why they're paying that premium.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And again, kind of jumping straight into the AI. I mean, I know that that has just caused drastic changes, probably from all fronts for everyone, from the end consumer to the businesses to the companies that are having to manage all of this data. What would you say have been like the biggest trends that you all have seen over the last couple of years that you think are going to make the biggest impact for construction businesses and home services?
So I think one thing that's really important to notice is just the acceleration at which these tools are coming online and improving. I think for a long time, we've had a really good time like dunking on, for lack of a better word, how dumb AI can be. And it is a little bit fun to kind of like put something into a tool and have it come up with a solution that is absolutely nonsensical that no human being would ever propose. And I think a lot of what I'm focused on now is when we're working with AI, and this is again useful in terms of what I understand from how people are using Google platforms and how people are using these tools with their businesses or in their personal lives, is that the prompt is really important. And there's certain things that AI is not good at, partly not good at yet, and sometimes just like never going to be as good at. So a really great example is AI can't spell. So if you go into a video platform and you want to say like, make me a video and, put this name here or use this, it will always spell it wrong. And in order to correct that, it's actually quite simple. You have to say, make me a video where a dinosaur is driving a Ferrari and like, spell the word Ferrari like this. And then it will do it. But,
Hmm.
you normally wouldn't have to explain that. And I think I've heard a lot of people can give some good analogies about like, AI is not a director at your company. It's an intern. You need to train it and you need to really put that time into understanding how to engage with it and how to talk with it. So, for example, last football season, I joined a fantasy football league with my colleagues. This is something I really love doing. And this year I used Gemini to help me make decisions in my lineup every week. And I kind of wrote about what that was like. And Gemini had some interesting perspectives. I could see how it was aggregating, but really my goal there was I wanted to understand the biases in the model and how that affected the outputs that it made, because I think that's something that more practitioners need to get used to, is that our models are trained based on the human inputs, which are biased. So how do we correct for those biases rather than kind of taking things at face value and understanding or accepting that, the system is saying this, the AI decided this, when in fact the AI decided that because that's how you trained it.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting how there has been this like, it definitely feels like the AI has gotten a lot smarter, over the last several months, and like it's becoming, a much better tool. I remember early on where, kind of just even asking it like simple math questions, and it just couldn't, it
Terrible at
maybe
that.
6 out of
Answer
10
that.
times it got it
Yeah.
right, but sometimes it got it wrong, and it's just like, how is that even possible?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that is like when I think about how businesses are onboarding this technology, I think that patience piece is really key. One of the leaders in my organization, Sean Downing, he says that AI right now is the crappiest it's ever going to be. And I think we see that a lot of like if you tried to adapt some technology 2 years ago, but you didn't really have the hours to put into training it and to getting it set up and to training your staff on how to operate with it and how they can use it, you probably didn't really see much of a payoff. And I think that definitely stopped a lot of a lot of companies, a lot of leaders in those positions from moving forward, which, I get it. I think to some degree, a lot of companies are essentially making AI homework that they're giving to their employees. And they're saying, you learn to use these things that are clunky and they're difficult. And, the benefit isn't really for you. It's more for me. And I think the success I've seen is when companies and when leaders can say, like, I've got this tool that's going to take away the worst part of your job. And that's really where you see people who are willing to invest the time, because, we all have parts where I love my job, but there's definitely parts of it that I really don't like. And how can we make it so that AI is doing those parts so I can do the parts that I enjoy more?
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely seems like there's a lot of, kind of fear about, is this going to replace a ton of people,
Hmm.
and the need for them and what it's going to do to the workforce. And, I'm curious, I mean, what is your thought? I mean, do you
Yeah.
think that there are going to be, entire industries or certain positions that, we're going to just wake up one day and there's just not really a need for?
So I think that AI is like lots of other advancements in this area. So, for example, like, I live in Oakland, California. My office is in San Francisco. So if I'm going out, if I'm going to drive over the Bay Bridge, there's a line where I go under with my fast pass, and there are still booths where human beings used to sit in that booth and take money from people. That job doesn't exist anymore. And I think from that perspective, like, actually sitting in a booth and breathing car exhaust all day is not a good job for a human being.
Yeah.
There's nobody who should be doing that. I think the challenge that we really need to focus on is, like, what is the replacement? Because we can't just take away jobs and workforces without giving them other things to do. And I would say with AI is actually in a really good position, because the work that you can do instead of the work that AI is doing is so much more valuable. So an example I share often is that I started my career building econometric models. So I'm going to talk a little bit about statistics for 1 minute, but I promise it will not be painful and it'll be short. But basically, the type of models I would running, the way you would do this is you would have these massive data sets. I would put my data into the model. I would type some, messages, say, like, here are my inputs. Here's the way I want you to model it. And I would click run. And then, I would go get a cup of tea or a cookie or something, because that's going to run for 10 minutes. And then I come back and I look at what the output is. And I decide if I like the output, or I decide if I want to change it. So then I, take that output, I make some changes to my inputs, and I click run. And then I, go do something else for 10 minutes, because that's going to run. And I would do this for literally weeks until I got a model that I was happy with. And now we have tools where essentially you kind of put in all your inputs, it runs every iteration, it decides kind of the things that it thinks you most likely want to see, and it'll kind of show you like the top 5. And then I pick from the top 5.
Hmm.
Now, why that's important is that the point of my job was not to run the model. The point of my job was to take the data and understand what decisions we should make and what things we should change based on what the data said. That part's actually hard, and that part's actually what AI can't replace. The replaceable part is not actually the objective. And I think that's such an important thing with AI is, like, where can we replace the task that gives us more time to focus on the objective? Because my job now is much more fulfilling. I would much rather sit with the customers that I work with and talk about strategically, like, what are we going to do with this information? How can we actually make this usable? How can we actually make this happen? Rather than being locked in a windowless room and, clicking run every 10 minutes for weeks at a time.
Sure. That's interesting. So I'm curious, like, let's frame it and talk about in regards to like marketing, right? So a lot of
Mhm.
contractors are figuring, trying to figure out how can I get, to show up in Google? How can,
Mhm.
when my, my customer, my potential customer is searching, for something, they often think they just need to stuff a bunch of keywords into a bunch of text on their website, and then that will eventually somehow kind of help Google find them
Yeah.
and start servicing them. Like, where would you say, like, AI is going to kind of change that notion of SEO? And I know there's the new term, the AIO. Like, kind of how
Yeah.
is all of this kind of shifting right now?
Yeah. So I would say a big factor here is really uh, moving away from keywords. What Google has gotten very, very good at is identifying that customer's objective. And I think if I were in, the kind of the situation you're describing where, I want to show up on Google, really think about what the actual objective is. I think very few customers would say their objective is to get a lot of people onto their website. Now, that can be a step towards the objective of getting more clients or booking more consultations or doing more site visits, or I'm sorry, doing like not website visits, but like site visits to a physical building site. Because that's really important, because when we think about like, well, how do I get the right keywords so that I show up and then people come to my website? That's actually less important. You would actually rather show up less frequently in front of a customer that really wants your service,
Mm.
rather than show up as much as possible and hope that you kind of get in front of the right person. So that's where our tools like AIO are really, really valuable, because it's allowing customers to describe more clearly what they're really looking for. Because not everyone is the right fit for every construction company. If you are looking for, a deck, you actually, if you're a design build company that mostly does kitchens, you actually don't really need to show up in front of that person. And what AIO is kind of letting us do is it's really getting more conversational. So one of the patterns that we're seeing is that by and large across Google, very long queries are growing much faster than shorter ones. So if you think about yourself using Google 20 years ago versus yourself using Google 15 years ago versus 10 years ago. So what people typically did is you kind of type in like the title of a book, or you type in a couple nouns and maybe a location, and know that, the system can kind of put those things together. Now, what you really want to do is type in sentences that describe exactly what you're looking for. So instead of saying like, what's the best electric toothbrush? What people are doing is they're saying, what's the best electric toothbrush that doesn't use a battery, that is best for people who are traveling, who live, south of the Arctic Circle, something like that. Like very, very specific about like, what's the product that I really need? And then we can parse it out. Because in that case, showing up for that type of search, if you're able to kind of fit that person's exact desire, that's so much more powerful than showing up 100 times for somebody who doesn't really know what they want or may not really be a good fit for your business to begin with.
Yeah, it seems like that would even hurt you too. Like if Google sees a bunch of people coming to your website and immediately leaving, and they just think it's not relevant, not important, like not the right fit. Like, I mean, ultimately you're getting sort of docked for that, right?
Yeah. So, and I would say like, I'm not authorized to speak on the Google organic algorithm, but it is true that if people are not, one of the ways that we decide who shows up is the website experience. So if there are indicators that the website experience isn't satisfactory, then that will long-term not benefit you. And again, like it really comes down to like, what's your actual objective? Like very few businesses is the objective to get people to the website.
And so when you say website experience, are we talking about like how fast the website loads, if it loads on mobile versus desktop, like what kind of how many interactions there are on the website?
Yeah, so that I would say like now load time, mobile, those are all table stakes. If you haven't adapted to people making big decisions on their mobile phones, like you are behind. You really need to catch up. Um, because yes, people just expect fast web pages. They expect them to load quickly. And people will leave experiences if the site takes too long to load. So those are very critical operational uh, elements that need to be in place regardless of what you're selling or what your business model is. Now, beyond that, things that are useful, and I think a lot of things that maybe, I think a minute ago, you kind of talked about like bounce rates of like people coming to the site and then leaving immediately without going further into the site. Now, that doesn't actually have to be a bad thing. If you are driving people to the right part of your web page where they get the information they need, it's okay that they, technically bounce. So that's not necessarily a bad interaction or something gone wrong. I would say the things that are beneficial are, once people get to your website, are they able to easily find the information they need, or are they able to kind of take steps to get it? So things like, having a lot of different options in order to get more information. So, being able to make a phone call, but being able to text or send an email. We know that kind of that call only interface is not the preferred method of communication for a lot of customers. Other factors that can be at play can really be like making sure that you're clear on your website about what your offering is. I think sometimes, from an advertising perspective, there can be this belief that you want to, be as broad, kind of force people to reach out to you for more information. That's actually not how most people really want to operate. So they'd actually prefer that you give them some of the information they can decide up front if they are a good fit for your business. An example I would say is like, and again, this is my opinion, not as a builder, but as a person who specializes in customer behavior, is that if you are offering services, put a ballpark figure of, how much something costs on your website. It doesn't have to be like all encompassing. You can put some caveats around it, but it's actually really beneficial for you and the person on the website. If your floor is way above their ceiling, it's not a good fit, and it's okay. That's totally fine for both people in this party, but it is helpful because it saves both people's time. And again, it's like, you can say like, here's a picture of a bathroom we did, and, this could cost between X and Y, just to give people a little bit of a sense. Because something that we see a lot when it comes to home services, when it comes to people coming to Google, one of the most important things they search is cost. And today, I would say Google has done a good job in kind of filling in some of that information of saying, like, depending on where you live, this is what we often see for a bathroom remodel. And that kind of just baseline helps people, because some people honestly aren't sure if they're talking about a $5,000 project or a $50,000 project.
Yeah.
And I've often seen, when I look at survey data from many organizations, but people will often say like, yes, I'm planning a bathroom remodel and my budget is $800. Now, I would say like, there's, depending on your skills, you can go to Home Depot, you can buy products that you need, you can do a lot of things yourself, but I think very few contractors are offering services that are $800. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Yeah. So I would say the more you can give people information, and if you're the business owner, the types of questions that they ask. How can you be of service to them with your website so that they don't necessarily have to reach out or force them to call you to get some very basic information?
So where is Google coming up with like, how much does a bathroom remodel cost in my area? Like, I mean, how would it even, know that information?
So a lot of this comes from things like Google reviews. So, if you have a Google My Business profile, people leave reviews on that. More and more people are putting information about cost. And I think, again, it comes to that fact of like, before people took on a project, the most important or one of the most important factors for them was how much it was going to cost. And if it was hard for them to find that information, they tend to be more forthcoming about what it ended up costing. And again, like, construction is complicated. Often prices increase. So there's many, many sources, but I'd say reviews are a really, really important run for companies that are willing to publish averages. That can be helpful. Google also can, look at scholarly papers. So things like studies that are done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics will look at things like the cost of home repairs over time. So like that information is also accessible.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've noticed, and I'm not sure exactly when this started, but now, like, I mean, if you go search for, I'm looking for, a plumber, there's now kind of this like sponsored listing of a couple different businesses, and then they have a get quote button next to them. Is that a new feature, or has that always been there?
Good. Yeah. So there are there are always changes. So that I would say is relatively new to have that button right there. So some of the changes that we have recently. So if to that point, like there's different types of listings that we support on Google. So being able to provide more information generally is just helpful for that experience. So that I think what you're describing was originally, I believe it was a local service listing was what it was called.
Yeah.
And the original iteration was basically like, you could have a sponsored listing and there was a phone call. Or you could like text a call. And it was basically like, if somebody made the phone call, then, you paid $1 or whatever it is. That was the very first way that was kind of introduced. And over time that area has developed to demonstrate more of the things that are more interesting to consumers. So to your point there of like, Google gets feedback on everything we build, and that's information that we're kind of gathering in order to make those products better. Because at the end of the day, Google is only a company if people are willing to use it. So being able to kind of fulfill that need and say like the most important people have right off the bat is the quote. So replacing that instead of, with the hours that you're open or your address, that request
Yeah.
a quote can be deemed as more important. For a lot of these products, again, there are organic listings, there are paid listings. I also don't work directly with this product, so I don't want to say that this is the official
Sure.
communication from Google, but part of that often comes up to that specific customer and what we think will work best. So something that might be easy to understand would be like, um, and if you ever are looking for a product, let's say like headphones, and you'll see ads with like pictures on them. Sometimes you'll see something that says like fast delivery, or you might see something with like the rating on it. And depending on the customer in that moment, you can decide whether you're going to show the rating or the speed of the delivery or if it's on sale. So those are kind of all possibilities that we can plug and play. And the reasoning is that people need different things in different moments, and being able to customize your ads by having those options available makes a better experience for the customer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so what I'm hearing though is that it's important for, for these home services businesses to, to really try to include the information that the customer really wants to know, which we all know is about price. Give
Mhm.
us some sort of a ballpark, give us some sort of a range or an indication on, like, we understand that you're an interested, potential, buyer for our construction services or whatever it may be. And, like, we need to kind of give them, some information so that Google will say, hey, we understand, that this person's looking for your services, but we also know that there's going to be more information, which, if price is the objective a lot of the time, then they're going to favor those companies who have more of that information. And then maybe even request a quote or get a price or schedule a call, those types of actions.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And so if you think about like the types of things that people might come to Google for, and the types of things they search for, if you are a premium design build forum, you probably are not a fit for somebody who's looking for cheap bathroom remodel. And so if that were, if somebody is, and more people are providing these details in their search, they're saying things like, you know, landscaping under $1,000 a month or pool maintenance under XYZ. So the more that you can have that information available, either on your website or, if you have, really satisfied customers, you can ask them to mention that in their review. Then that's going to make it easier for Google to recognize that match between customers and providers.
Hmm. So you've talked about Google reviews a couple times here, and I mean, obviously they're an extremely important signal, to Google and others that, hey, we either got, a business that's delivering great service, or a business that's underperforming. Have AIs, are they able to, read and consume and follow along with all of the Google reviews that get posted every day, or are some of them able to read it better than others? Because I think there's been a lot of mixed, kind of understandings on, like, what AI, can Claude, can Chat,
Mhm.
can Gemini, can Grok, like, can they actually read those Google reviews or not?
Yeah, so really good question. And the answer is sort of. So when we think about the elements of a review, there's always one section that is like the number of stars. That is very easy for machines to read. They can really understand, what is 3.4 out of 5. That's clear. Now, as far as the text, that can be a little bit more complex. And I would say this is another the case again, like a year ago versus 2 years ago versus today, the answer is closer to yes. And I would say the tools that are most successful at it, it really is about that volume. So if you have 3 reviews, uh, you can kind of and it's not crazy to think if you have 3 reviews, one of them might be really bad. If you have 10,000 reviews, some of them are definitely really bad. There's no way you get to that number without some bad ones. But being able to parse kind of in aggregate what are people are saying. So what are the words that are coming up repeatedly? AI tools and algorithms are able to do that. That is that's just pattern detection. That's exactly what these systems are built for. Things that it is not good at are slang or turns of phrase. When you think about kind of the ways over time, think about all the different ways that we can describe things as good. All the words that we use to describe things as good is a massive, massive range. So things like customer service, we can say like, here's a word that's really important, and we can understand a couple adjectives around that. Now, when it comes to, ways that we could describe our appreciation for something, sometimes that praise can actually be, I'm trying to think of like a good example. I'm not going to swear, but if you think about like, if somebody says that this product is the S word, that's really bad. If somebody says this product is the S word, that's actually good. So like those are the kind of things that can trip up an AI
True.
model. That might not be an example that you want to put in the podcast. So I can think of another one. But like I'd say the things that it can do, that AI is able to do is detect patterns and aggregations of what types of words are showing up more than other types of words. And so typically I would say, if you're looking at Google reviews, what models, if you're using ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it is, it'll typically kind of give you a range and say like, for the good reviews, these are the words that come up. For the bad reviews, these are the words that come up. So
Hmm.
that's typically, I'd say, where we are right now. I think that'll continue to evolve and continue to be able to detect nuances in a more sophisticated way, but that's where we're at today.
So when contractors are asking their customers for a review, would you recommend that they should like kind of give a little bit of guidance in terms of, what sort of information they might include in the review, how to structure it, kind of things like that? Or is it just, hey, would you mind leaving us a review and just kind of leave it up to them and just let it kind of naturally come out? Or like, I mean, are there ways to sort of optimize your reviews for AI?
So I would say this is a little bit of ideally, yeah, you give them a template and they would fill it in. That would be like really readable by AI. Now, as humans, when we kind of detect that template, we don't like it and we don't trust it as much.
Hmm.
So I think the key thing here is that most important person to serve is the human being who's reading reviews about your company. So those interview reviews need to be genuine. And you've read fake reviews before. People can detect when it's not sincere. So I would say from that perspective, I don't recommend a template. What I would recommend is if you have a customer who's happy, or they say, during the project something happens and they say, we really appreciated how you handled XYZ, or we're really thankful that you brought us that option that ended up costing less, or we really appreciate that you came back and said that the shipping cost less than you thought and you gave us a refund. That would be a good moment to say like, could you mention that in a review for me?
Hmm.
Because it's genuine feedback. It wasn't prompted. And that's the type of information that people value when they think about what types of contractors do I want to work with. I want to work with somebody who, has good judgment and who, will help me find ways to save money, even though it doesn't necessarily benefit them right away. So that's what I would say is the best approach is like, if you are brought a specific piece of feedback that other customers would find valuable, ask them to put it in their review.
Yeah. No, that's great feedback. And, I know like the Google business profile, I think it used to be called Google My Business or whatever. Like, I mean, how does that come into play? Because I feel like a lot of people don't really understand, the value of creating that listing and then, continually updating it. Like, does that make a big impact for them?
Yeah. So I think people come to Google for all types of things in all parts of their life. And I think sometimes an overlooked part of the reason people come to Google is for very, very basic information. So things like, how late is this store open? What is the address? How do I get there? So like having your Google business review, available on maps is really important because people have to know how to get there. They're just checking to see what time you're going to close. Or, they know that the one in their town sells XYZ products, but they're not sure if the one, half an hour away does. That kind of simple information that you have available about, being able to say like, these products are in stock at these locations. This location's open till XYZ is really simple information that people are looking for in order to make their lives more convenient. So if we're thinking about, depending on where your offices are located, you can say that we're open till these hours, but after, we're closed for a lunch break. That type of information just really makes sure that people are not showing up at a time if they just need to check in on something quickly while there might not be anybody there to greet them. So I think I think sometimes people overlook the basics as far as like the Google My Business profile of like, well, it's there. What do I need it for? Like, just think about why somebody might be looking it up. And it's often for those kind of simple reasons. So like, why do people go to maps? One thing I like to share is that a surprising number of people go to google.com and type facebook.com and then click on the link to go to facebook.com. So, people really are coming to Google for absolutely everything. So thinking about those really simple use cases is really important.
Sure. So, again, I often find a lot of contractors, especially kind of the ones that are earlier on,
Mhm.
creating their businesses, like they're, one, they're usually overwhelmed and they're probably trying to wear every hat and they don't have, a marketing team and people to like help them sort of understand, how important it is, and the strategy for marketing and creating content. When you look at, all of the different avenues of where you can create content, whether it's, on your website, creating blog posts or new pages, or, it's creating content on, on Facebook and Twitter or X, and, Instagram and all that. And we got YouTube. Like, how should people be thinking about where is the best use of their time and their effort, and where are they going to get the biggest return, maybe early on, and then once they are an established business? Like, I mean, in my opinion, I mean, it seems like over the last several years, like, I mean, YouTube and video has,
Yeah.
video is king. I mean, it's just, the more content that you can create, that you can put out there in video, and whether you get it on social, you get it on YouTube, like, I feel like people really love to consume that content, and they get to know the person, behind, the website, behind the content, who is actually going to be there. But like, what do you see, and where do you think, the best value is for creating content in today's age?
Yeah. So, when I'm talking about, and again, just recognizing like I do work for those companies. So I do believe that those are some of the best, most influential platforms. So I don't want to, I'm going to say good things about them. And I recognize that I'm not an unbiased person, but just speaking more broadly about the types of content that resonates, I would say customers like to feel savvy and well informed. And I think if you can create content that lends that feeling, that is gold in this industry, especially. I think for a long time, and this isn't exclusive to construction, remodeling, etc. I think people saw like this kind of hidden knowledge as power, as like, well, you have to hire a professional because they're the only ones that understand XYZ. And I think more and more people want to be in on that information. They want to understand why certain things cost more than others, why certain projects are more complex than others. And I think that that's actually a really useful tool that helps sell these premium offerings and really that service. Because I think people enjoy being able to tell their friends about, well, we had this problem with my project because there was a foundation problem, or there was a legacy plumbing problem, or this thing came up. And if you can explain why it caused the problem and kind of what the solution was, then you as the customer are part of the solution. If it is kind of this black box where you gatekeep the information and say like, oh, well, this is this thing and therefore it's going to be more expensive, nobody really enjoys that feeling of kind of being not, or being, maybe spoken down to is too harsh, but I would say like of being spoken to as if they're not capable of learning the information. Because you're right, like you hired a professional because you don't know, but can they take you along and kind of educate you on those things? So when I'm thinking about the type of content that I want to see related to remodeling is like, how can it make me smarter? So even if I'm not, I live in a condo, so like I'm not in the business of landscaping, but I do love looking at beautiful yards. So if you can kind of teach me about like why these plants are more beautiful or lower maintenance or a better choice for certain climates, like that kind of speaks to my aspirational life of being able to live in a place that has a lot of land. If you're thinking about, tiles, like talking about the craftsmanship behind some of the most expensive tiles in the world and why people pick them and like why they are, so sought after, but then also what's something that is beautiful, but is actually much more functional, because often those very expensive premium products are less functional than some of the more modern products that we might be able to offer. So when I really think about like what types of contents people want to watch, it often is like what makes you smarter, what makes you feel more in the know, is what really, really resonates. And then as far as platforms, like one of the great things is that yes, people are kind of looking for different things on different platforms. I do think generally if you can get people engaged in your longer form, that does tend to pay dividends more than the shortest form content.
Hmm.
And, I think really just like understand who you are. Like we are not all teenage dancers, and, you don't need to, if it really is fun for your crew out one day to do like a dance on your site and then post that to TikTok, if that would be fun for your crew, I want you to do it. But you don't need to do it if it won't be fun and it doesn't actually speak to the product that you're offering. If that would actually
Sure.
kind of, if the guys that you're working with don't want to do that, like don't do it. Like that's okay.
Yeah. So you brought up short form versus long form, which again, I feel like it's heavily debated. And at one point, I remember like people said like on your YouTube page, you either had to choose one or the other, and that you shouldn't mix both. I have no idea if there was any merit to that, but like
Mhm,
when you think about again kind of those 60-second, 30-second very short reels and clips and stories, like how do you decide, like, is it better to put a bunch of those out, because I know those often will try to be used to kind of attract people who aren't currently following you, versus like putting out a 30-minute or an hour long long form video that's kind of like going in depth and showing the behind the scenes, and like how do you decide between the two?
mhm. So I would say the best thing, especially if you're starting out, is prioritize high quality long form content and then use that to source your short form content. I would say,
Hmm.
to your point is like, I'm assuming here that we're not talking about somebody that has a staff that manages this and has a production team that can kind of do both. If you have to pick one, I would say prioritize the longer form content and then, find clips within that you can use for shorter form. Um, I think the variety is important because, again, like people are in the mood for different things. But I would say for somebody who's selling a high ticket item, like multi-thousand-dollar remodeling or landscaping or whatever it might be, the ROI on the short form probably isn't going to pay off the way it can for something that somebody can decide to buy in 30 seconds. Um, so that's my perspective. Again, I'm not a social strategist, but I would say as far as like what will give you the return, I would say that I would put my money on the more, the longer form that makes a customer feel savvy.
Yeah. And I think too, it's, a lot of times people kind of just, they feel like I can only showcase, the end product. But like, I think to your point about making them kind of, feel like they're part of the journey and that they're actually learning. I mean, if we're remodeling your kitchen and we get in there and we open up the walls and we come across this challenge that, we had no idea was going to be there, and like yada, yada, like, would you say that capturing those moments and trying to make this like, an educational opportunity for others, to be able to see and kind of follow along and like learn about the process. So it's not just like, hey, here's the before and the after, it's kind of this like journey and what it actually is like to go through a large, construction project or something like that. Cause a lot of people they've never done that. They don't know what it's like to come in and rip out all the walls and the cabinets and the flooring. And,
There
we're
might
going
be
to be in a
mold.
war
There's all
zone.
kinds of crazy stuff in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
All kinds of things can go wrong. No, I think that's a really great point. I think that is an amazing thing to show, because I think because the idea that we want to focus on the final product and kind of how beautiful it is in the end gets us into trouble because it's very rare that you do a large scale project that doesn't run into several hurdles. So
Yeah.
if people are kind of used to seeing these seamless products or projects that just kind of pop out after 3 months, then their expectation is really skewed when they meet with a contractor and they keep running into delays. It feels like this is some strange thing that maybe the contractor has done wrong.
Hmm.
And so I think the more you can kind of visualize those things, and I would say, especially like if I'm looking to hire somebody to do a complex job, I would love to see that they've encountered some gnarly problems and figured out how to solve it. I sit on the HOA board of my building, and I think something that has been just really interesting for me to learn is some of those like kind of expected obstacles and how we can plan for them and create contingencies. And then what I've like often seen is, we have the board, we have our meetings, we get all this information, and then we try to kind of distill it for the rest of the residents. And often people are like, well, I mean, why are you doing this? It seems like this seems like a terrible decision. And it's like, well, I mean, if you came to the last 6 hours of meetings I had, you probably wouldn't think that. But I get how if you just kind of show people the end result, it seems like you're going to charge me how much for what? Like it
Yeah.
is I think those process steps are really critical. And I think honestly, it's better for everybody to have them a little bit more
Sure.
visible.
So I see a lot of people again, they're like, all right, I want to start with kind of the organic, the, just creating content, sort of doing all this free stuff. At what point do you think it's important for a contractor who again wants to just do everything in their power to get found? When should they start thinking about running ads? And are there any hidden benefits of like that people may not realize? Like it's, are there other things that other signals that get sent to Google or to others when you do start running ads beyond just the, I showed up in this person's search and they came to my website? Like, are there other factors that, the hidden benefits that people might get from having an ad account and running some?
Yeah. So just to be super clear, the paid results have nothing to do with the organic results on Google. However, we have consistently seen that as when a human being comes to Google, they look for bathroom remodeler near me, they get a series of results. If people tend to click on organic links, seeing what's available in the paid links and have those correspond to the organic and the paid benefits both spots. So basically, your organic ads perform better if you also show up in the paid results, and the paid results perform better if you also show up in the organic. Now, there's nothing you can do. Like there's not like you pay this dollar and then it increases your ad rank on SEO. Those are completely separate departments. But as a user, they appear to kind of reinforce each other. So when we see that this is both, this is a top organic ad, people tend to kind of that validates that advertiser as, likely a good fit for what they're looking for. Now, as far as kind of at what point do you consider paid, I would say if you have goals that you are not meeting right now, or if you have, if your organic isn't meeting your needs, I think then that's a good opportunity to diversify your efforts. So if you are able to get a nice, healthy pipeline without paid ads, you should do that. If your ambition is to double your bookings in the next 2 years, unless your organic results have been doubling year over year, you're probably not going to get there with just organic results. So what really I'd say was decided is like, what's your trajectory and what are your goals? And if those two things are not going to, if your current trajectory isn't going to meet your goals, then that's a good opportunity to see where paid can help you.
Sure. And for what it's worth, for all of our listeners out there, I can tell you we have, tried and worked with all the different forms of advertising. And I can say, Google Ads by far just smokes everything else out there. Like the person is searching for something that they want right now versus they're just passively scrolling, on some other site, and then an ad pops up and it may or may not, trigger their interest. But if they're really, a buyer, a serious buyer, then we see them going, and searching for that specific thing. And so for us, I mean, Google Ads have been king of the hill, doing a lot of great work. I'm curious, how do you see AI
Mm,
affecting, Google's ability to continue serving up and getting in front of those decision makers? Because,
yeah.
again, we've seen a lot of people, they're now, they're asking their favorite AI, the questions that they used to go to Google for. And so kind of what do you think is going to happen there?
So, I think that was something like when we first saw people, and Google specifically is when we really saw people latching onto ChatGPT more than our platforms, that definitely set off some alarm bells. Um, I would say some things haven't changed. So while AI is definitely on the rise and we're seeing triple digit growth year over year, platforms like Grok and ChatGPT and Gemini still have a relatively small share of what people are kind of asking the internet things. Um, so that's kind of the one factor is like there is like people are definitely still coming to Google search. Some things that are adapting is that when it comes to what people are, sorry, I'm gonna pause and kind of go back a second. When I think about like how people are actually using the platform, Google is definitely still the place where people come for trusted recommendations. And it's very important for Google that we prioritize what people who are coming and doing the searching for get what they need more than what do, the advertisers like, how are those individual needs being met? Because ultimately we think we can achieve both. The more we can meet the needs of the people who are coming to Google and asking questions, the more everything else comes along. Now, once we start prioritizing the needs of our paid advertisers, we're going to start to see that consumer experience break down. So that has really been a founding kind of principle when Google thinks about how we're adapting our products and how we're changing the way that the interface on Google changes. That can sometimes affect the way performance looks for some advertisers. So for a lot of people, they'll say, well, I've seen uh, that my performance has declined or my costs have gotten more expensive. And that can be due to a lot of factors. Often it is because of competitor action, or it might be that customers are kind of looking for something different than what is available with that particular advertiser. And maybe they haven't made it clear enough to the Google algorithm or to customers who are coming to Google to interface with that. So I would say I have a lot of confidence that Google understands why people are coming to their platform and how to use it. And we are good at adapting to that and understanding, kind of letting all the other needs of our business follow behind that.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question? I feel like maybe I
Yeah,
went off.
I certainly, I've always sort of felt like, and I know kind of, really, ChatGPT, they kind of got the early jump. It feels
Mhm.
like, ton of big rush of people, and then, sort of feels like, Anthropic and Claude have now kind of surfaced and come up, pretty heavily here. But like, I've always had this like thought. It's just like, man, like I feel like Google's this dark horse that like it has so much data that you guys have been, indexing and have like, that you've had for decades now. And these other companies are now having to like figure out how to like create their own data sets and train on them. I mean, it seems like you guys are really well positioned to ultimately, come out with, and I know you've got Gemini, and there's a lot of ways that you'll be able to continue kind of getting AI in front of people. And I've even seen it now. I mean, when you go search, like, you're getting the AI summaries, and you're getting some of that, feeling of like you're using a different platform, like it's kind of being brought into that, user experience. I mean, it seems like in the long run, I mean, if I had to bet on any of them, I mean, I don't know how you'd bet against Google.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, one thing that is very important, I should have mentioned this before, is that like the fact that people search on other platforms or use other AI grows the whole pie. It doesn't like take bites out of other pies. And I think there was maybe initially some concern that it would, people would shift their behaviors. But what we've generally said, if you do 10 searches a month on ChatGPT, that means you do 10 searches less on these other platforms. And we really just haven't seen that be the case. It's
Mm,
more that people are asking different questions that they used to ask. Questions that they wouldn't have come to a search engine for are now questions that you regularly go to a search engine for.
mm,
And it might change, instead of, if you used to say like, a couple nouns and a verb, and then you would do another search to narrow it down, and then do another search to narrow it down. Now I think a lot of these platforms are better at kind of saying, like, from that first search, like, what are some follow-up questions that help you get to the place that you're going to go, without necessarily ticking up the number of times you type something into that search bar.
sure.
But ultimately is like people are just asking more questions. They're asking types of questions that they wouldn't have been able to ask a couple years ago. And I think, that comes down to a lot of it is like the types of data that didn't used to be considered data. So, again, as a statistician, we used to really say like data is when you have lists of numbers that can be put into rows and columns. And now data is kind of anything.
I want to give one other, shout out and plug here to Google. I think that, a lot of people don't realize that Google actually provides support, and I would actually say is great support, but like the way that we've gone about it, and we have Google Workspace, I mean, again, I think you've got an incredible offering for, small businesses to be able to get all their email,
Mhm.
calendaring. You've got, the Google Drive, and you got, Google Docs and Sheets and all of that stuff. But like, by having that established relationship with Google, if I ever need support, I mean, it is a single click away, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, and it's just so valuable, for us to know that if we ever have any sort of an issue with anything, whether it's, our reviews are disappearing, or, we got, something going on with our email, or one of our accounts got an issue, like, I mean, just like being able to reach out and immediately get help is so valuable. But I think a lot of people think, oh, Google's so big, they can't service their customers, and they don't even try, and there's not a phone number. It's like, that's not the case at all, actually. Like, you just need to have your account set up. But like, I would encourage and I would recommend all businesses, to establish that relationship with Google, because again, if you think about how much of your success is ultimately tied back to, how well does Google know you, and how well are you, getting those reviews and running those ads and managing all of your growing business and adding people into your workspace. Like, I mean, having all of that tied together and then, where Jim and I can just search across everything and give you great content and great information. Like, I think it's invaluable, and it's extremely affordable. I mean, it's a nominal expense for any business, but having that, at your service when you need it is extremely helpful.
No, and I appreciate you saying that. I think, to your point, Google does want to prioritize support on those, especially on, like, bad actor factors like you're talking about, because it is worse for everybody if people can't trust the listings that they're seeing on Google.
Yeah.
So it's worse for businesses, it's worse for Google itself, it's worse for the people who are trying to find somebody to do work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, this has been extremely insightful. Like, I really appreciate you sharing all this, behind the scenes here with us, Jane. Like, means a lot. I'm curious, as we wrap up. I mean, is there any kind of last, final advice that you would give, for contractors out there that if you had to kind of pick one or two things, your best advice that you could give them, what would it be?
Okay, so a pattern I see emerging across every industry is that people really want to rebrand as tech companies. So they'll say, we're a tech company that sells shoes, or we're a tech company that builds decks. And I think often, the desire there is to be associated with the type of innovation and new thinking and high margins that tech companies are able to achieve. And what I often see people doing with those types of rebrands is they just mean that they're incorporating technology into a lot of their operations. And so I would encourage advertisers, obviously, like in a lot of ways, we all are tech companies, is thinking about what culturally are you doing to be a tech company? What structures do you have in place? And so if I were to give some advice, if you want to be a tech company that remodels kitchens or a tech company that does landscaping, I would say some things that you would need to do is you'd need to think about what risks are you going to take, because innovation is risky. But not innovating is also risky. It's just much harder to measure the risk of not innovating. So really think about, what does innovation mean to your industry and your company? And I would also say you need to set and discuss clear goals and objectives. I think that's something that a lot of tech companies do really well, that a lot of other types of businesses maybe struggle with, is that you need to have a few very clear goals and objectives that your teams can work to without necessarily doing a lot of oversight. So I would encourage us to be like technology companies in that we are truly innovating and we are truly setting ambitious goals and reaching them.
That's awesome. I love that. And one of our goals here with Job Trade, and we've built a huge community. I think we've got about 12,000 something hundred customers that are using our product, and like we always want to be a great role model to them, and they often say, oh, well, you're a software company, things you guys are doing it differently. It's like, no, like, just like you said, like we can all be tech savvy, we can all leverage technology, and it's about leveraging that technology to help you to operate better, more efficiently, be more focused, creating, better culture. Like all of those things, I think all go into play. And it doesn't mean that you have to be, a software company or providing a technology, product or service. It's that you're leveraging it and that you're keeping up with the times. And, again, that's exactly what I would say. Google does a great job role modeling for all of us on how to build a very large, very successful and scalable business. And, it's just an awesome resource that that you guys provide to all of the corporate America, and all of us who use you every single day, to get found, to solve problems, to build better businesses. So, thank you again for all of your insight here. Really appreciate it, and I know our audience will appreciate it as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I love the opportunity to speak to people like you in this field. So it's a nice change of pace for me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much.
Have a great one. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Builder Stories. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights that can help you in your journey along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at builderstories.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eric Fortenberry, and remember, every builder has a unique story. Keep building yours.